My name is Vincent Torres, and I'm 75 years old, sitting here in my small Albuquerque apartment, staring at an empty savings account statement where there should be $15,000 that I painstakingly saved over 8 years for my own funeral expenses, money that my children convinced me to entrust to them for safekeeping, and that they secretly spent on a luxury Hawaii vacation while telling me they were investing it for my future burial needs. Last month, when I asked to see the account balance to ensure everything was in order for when my time comes, my daughter Carmen laughed and told me I wouldn't need money when I'm dead anyway, and that their family vacation was more important than some old man's funeral arrangements. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please share your location in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, I hope you'll consider subscribing, because what happened to me shows how financial abuse can strip elderly people of their dignity even in death, and how family members can rationalize stealing from their parents by treating their final wishes as unimportant. Let me start by telling you about the careful planning I had done for my death, so you can understand what it meant to discover that my own children had stolen the money I had set aside to ensure I wouldn't be a burden to anyone when my time came. After my wife Rosa died from diabetes complications 6 years ago, I became acutely aware of my own mortality and the importance of preparing for my eventual death. Rosa's funeral had cost nearly $12,000, a significant expense that had strained our modest savings and required me to take out a small loan to cover all the costs. The experience taught me that death is expensive and that failing to plan financially for funeral arrangements can create enormous stress and hardship for surviving family members. I didn't want my children to face the same financial burden when I died, so I began setting aside money specifically for my funeral expenses. Every month, I would take $50 to $100 from my Social Security check and put it into a special savings account that I designated as my burial fund. Over 8 years, I accumulated $15,000 through careful budgeting and small sacrifices. I would skip meals, buy generic groceries, wear old clothes, and avoid unnecessary expenses so that I could contribute to the funeral fund. Every dollar represented a sacrifice made to ensure my children wouldn't struggle financially when I pass away. The money represented more than just funeral expenses. It was my way of maintaining dignity and independence even in death. I wanted to be buried next to Rosa in a nice casket with a proper service that honored our life together and provided closure for our family and friends. I had specific wishes for my funeral that I had discussed with my children many times over the years. I wanted a traditional Catholic service at our parish church, followed by burial in the cemetery plot I had purchased next to Rosa's grave. I wanted flowers, music, and a reception where people could share memories and comfort each other. These weren't extravagant requests, but they were important to me as expressions of my faith, my love for Rosa, and my respect for the relationships I had built over my lifetime. The funeral fund was my insurance that these wishes could be fulfilled without causing financial hardship for my family. My children seemed supportive of my funeral planning and expressed appreciation for my foresight in setting aside money for these expenses. Carmen, my daughter, and Miguel, my son, both told me they were proud of my responsibility and that they would honor my wishes when the time came. But as my health began to decline over the past 2 years, my children became increasingly interested in managing my finances and helping me with what they called estate planning. They suggested that keeping the funeral money in a simple savings account wasn't the best financial strategy, and that they could help me invest it more wisely. Carmen, who worked as a bank teller, convinced me that she could get better interest rates by moving the money to a different type of account that she could help me manage. She explained that this would help the money grow and ensure that there would be enough to cover rising funeral costs in the future. Miguel supported Carmen's suggestion and added that having family members involved in managing the money would ensure that everything was handled properly when the time came. He pointed out that I was getting older and might not be as sharp about financial matters as I used to be. Their arguments seemed reasonable and caring, and I was touched that my children wanted to help me manage my affairs more effectively. I trusted their judgment and their intentions, believing that they had my best interests at heart and wanted to ensure that my final wishes were fulfilled. In January 2023, I agreed to transfer the $15,000 from my personal savings account to a joint account that Carmen would help me manage. She assured me that the money would remain dedicated to funeral expenses and that she would keep careful records of the account balance and any transactions. Carmen explained that having her name on the account would make it easier for her to access the funds quickly when I died, avoiding delays and complications that could arise if the money was tied up in probate. This explanation made sense to me, and I was grateful for her practical thinking about these matters. For several months, I felt relieved and proud that I had taken steps to ensure my funeral arrangements were properly funded and that my children were involved in the planning process. I believed that I had solved a major concern about my death and that my family would be well prepared when the time came. Carmen provided me with periodic updates about the account, telling me that the money was earning good interest and growing steadily. She showed me official-looking documents that seemed to confirm that the funeral fund was secure and increasing in value over time. But I began to notice changes in my children's lifestyles and spending patterns that seemed inconsistent with their usual financial situation. Carmen began wearing expensive jewelry and designer clothes, while Miguel purchased a new truck and started talking about home renovation projects. When I asked about their apparent financial windfall, they explained that they had both received bonuses at work and were finally able to afford some of the things they had been wanting for years. Their explanation seemed plausible, and I was happy that they were doing well financially. In June 2023, Carmen mentioned that she and Miguel were planning a family vacation to Hawaii, something they'd been talking about for years but had never been able to afford. She said that they had finally saved enough money to take their families on this dream trip, and that they were excited about the opportunity. I was pleased that my children were able to take such a nice vacation, though I was surprised that they could afford such an expensive trip given their usual financial constraints. Hawaii vacations typically cost thousands of dollars per person, and both Carmen and Miguel had spouses and children who would be traveling with them. When I expressed concern about the cost of their vacation and whether they could afford such an expense, Carmen assured me that they had been planning and saving for this trip for a long time. She said that they deserved to enjoy themselves after working hard for so many years. The Hawaii vacation lasted 2 weeks and apparently included stays at luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, and various tourist activities and excursions. Based on the photos they shared and the stories they told, it seemed like they had spared no expense in making this a truly memorable family experience. After they returned from Hawaii, I began asking Carmen for updates about my funeral fund and wanted to see the current account balance to ensure that everything was still on track. I was concerned about inflation and rising funeral costs and wanted to make sure that $15,000 would still be sufficient for my needs. Carmen became evasive when I asked about the funeral fund, always saying that she would give me the information soon, but never following through with specific details about the account balance or recent transactions. Her reluctance to provide updates began to make me suspicious about what was happening with my money. When I pressed Carmen for specific information about the funeral fund, she became defensive and accused me of not trusting her to manage the money properly. She said that constantly asking about the account showed that I didn't have confidence in her abilities and that this hurt her feelings. Miguel supported Carmen's position and suggested that my concern about the money was excessive and unnecessary. He said that the funeral fund was safe and growing and that I should stop worrying about details that they were handling competently on my behalf. But their defensiveness and reluctance to provide concrete information about my money made me increasingly anxious about what was really happening with the funeral fund. I began to suspect that something was wrong and that my children weren't being honest with me about the account status. In August 2023, I decided to visit the bank where Carmen worked to inquire about the account status directly. I brought my identification and the original account documents to prove my connection to the funeral fund and my right to information about the balance and transactions. The bank representative who helped me was confused when I asked about the joint account with Carmen, and after checking their records, she informed me that the account had been closed several months earlier with all funds withdrawn in a single transaction. The devastating news that my funeral fund had been completely depleted was shocking and heartbreaking. $15,000 that I had saved through years of sacrifice and careful budgeting was gone, taken by the children I had trusted to protect my final wishes and dignity. When I confronted Carmen about the missing money, she initially tried to deny that anything was wrong and claimed that there must be some mistake with the bank records. But when I showed her the withdrawal documentation, she finally admitted that she and Miguel had used the money for their Hawaii vacation. Carmen's justification for stealing my funeral fund was callous and shocking. She argued that I wouldn't need money after I was dead, and that using it for a family vacation was a better investment than letting it sit in an account waiting for my death. She said that the vacation had created happy memories for their families that would last forever. Miguel echoed Carmen's reasoning and added that they had always planned to pay the money back eventually, but that the vacation opportunity had been too good to pass up. He claimed that they deserved to enjoy some of the money, while they were young enough to appreciate it. Both of my children seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset about their use of the funeral fund, and they appeared to believe that their justifications were reasonable and that I was being selfish by objecting to their decision. When I explained that the money was specifically designated for my funeral expenses and that stealing had violated my trust and jeopardized my final wishes, Carmen responded by saying that funerals were a waste of money and that I should be cremated cheaply instead of having an expensive burial. The complete lack of remorse or understanding from my children was devastating. Not only had they stolen money that I had worked years to save, but they were dismissing my religious beliefs and personal wishes about how I want to be buried as unimportant and wasteful. I realized that my children viewed me as an obstacle to their financial goals rather than as their father whose final wishes deserve respect and consideration. They had reduced me to a source of money that they felt entitled to access for their own purposes. The knowledge that I no longer had money set aside for my funeral created enormous anxiety about what would happen when I died. I worried that my children would choose the cheapest possible arrangements, that I wouldn't be buried next to Rosa, and that my death would become a financial burden rather than an opportunity for family and friends to honor my life. I also felt profound shame about being financially dependent on children who had already proven that they couldn't be trusted with money or with respecting my wishes. The thought of having to rely on them for funeral arrangements when they had already stolen my burial fund was humiliating and frightening. For months, I struggled with depression and anxiety about my precarious financial situation and the breakdown of trust with my children. I felt trapped between my need for their support as I aged and my knowledge that they were willing to exploit me financially for their own benefit. I began reaching out to community organizations and social services to explore options for low-cost funeral arrangements and to learn about resources available to elderly people who couldn't afford traditional burial services. These conversations were difficult and embarrassing, but necessary given my situation. But something unexpected happened that would restore both my financial security and my faith in human decency. Father Martinez, the priest at our parish church where Rosa and I had been members for over 30 years, heard about my situation through mutual friends and reached out to offer assistance. Father Martinez explained that the church had a special fund designed to help longtime parishioners with funeral expenses when they didn't have adequate resources. The fund was supported by donations from church members who wanted to ensure that all members of their community could receive dignified burial services. The church's assistance program would cover all of my funeral expenses, including the service, casket, burial plot maintenance, and reception, ensuring that I could be buried next to Rosa with the dignity and respect that I had always wanted for my final arrangements. More importantly, Father Martinez connected me with a church attorney who helped me recover the stolen funeral money from Carmen and Miguel through legal action. The attorney explained that what my children had done constituted financial elder abuse, and that they could face serious legal consequences if they didn't return the money. Faced with potential criminal charges and civil liability, Carmen and Miguel agreed to repay the $15,000 they had stolen from my funeral fund. The legal pressure and the involvement of church authorities made them realize that their actions had been more serious than they had understood. The recovery of my funeral money and the support from my church community helped me regain both my financial security and my sense of dignity and worth. I no longer had to worry about being a burden to my family or receiving inadequate funeral arrangements when I died. Working with Father Martinez and other church members on the funeral assistance program also gave me a sense of purpose and community that helped me heal from the betrayal by my children. I became involved in helping other elderly parishioners plan for their final arrangements and access available resources. Today, more than a year after discovering my children's theft, I have rebuilt my financial security and found peace about my eventual death. While my relationship with Carmen and Miguel remains strained, I've learned that family extends beyond blood relatives to include the community of people who share our values and support each other. The experience taught me about the importance of having legal protections for financial arrangements and the value of community support for elderly people who may be vulnerable to exploitation by family members. It also showed me that recovery is possible even from the most hurtful betrayals when we have access to people who care about our dignity and well-being. That's my story. How my children stole my funeral money for a Hawaii vacation and told me I wouldn't need it when I'm dead. But how my church community helped me recover the money and restore my dignity. Sometimes the family we choose through shared values and mutual support is more reliable than the family we're born into. And sometimes justice prevails when good people work together to protect the vulnerable.